The French President Emmanuel Macron is in China this week, where he is meeting with his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping. Macron is joined by top executives from French companies, including Airbus, BNP Paribas and Schneider, as he hopes to deepen commercial ties with Beijing. President Xi urged both countries to pursue an open dialogue. Listen in.
China and France should demonstrate their sense of responsibility, uphold the banner of multilateralism, see through the fog of uncertainty, and firmly stand on the right side of history. China is ready to work with France, always bearing in mind the fundamental interests of our peoples and the long-term interests of the international community, to overcome various disturbances, adhere to dialogue on equal footing, and open cooperation. Ensure that the China-France comprehensive strategic partnership moves forward more steadily and effectively in the next 60 years.
And trade is front and center during Macron's visit to China. France is currently running a huge deficit with China. In 2024, the value surpassed 46 billion euros. The European Union as a whole ran a 300 billion euro trade deficit with China last year. Recent disputes have also threatened to put Brussels and Beijing's strategic relationship at risk. Back in 2023, the EU undertook a probe on Chinese electric vehicle subsidies, and China responded with investigations into imports of European brandy, pork and dairy products. Now, President Xi is unlikely to grant France an exemption from duties on EU brandy imports. France is a key supplier of wine and spirits to China. Other exports include machinery, aircraft, leather goods and cosmetics as well. And it's important to keep in mind how the trade conversation will unfold in Beijing later today. Of course, we have actually already heard from the two presidents earlier in the morning. And I just would like to recap a little bit what they said here, because the message so far has been quite of a positive one. President Xi actually saying that both China and France are indeed looking to have further conversations here. And it's not just about trade. So hence we have Charlotte joining us in the studio. Charlotte, of course, we know that trade is very important for the conversations happening in Beijing. But let's discuss as well what else and what makes this visit so important from a French perspective here.
Yeah, I mean, trade is an important one because, as we know, France and Europe is very worried of being the collateral victim of the trade tensions between the US and China. We know the question of steel and a lot of cheap Chinese products kind of flooding the European market as well is one of the concerns that will be approached there. Also, so it is a balancing act there for President Macron that has been, cultivating this relationship with China as a priority for many years. As you were saying, this is his fourth state trip to the country. Xi Jinping himself came last year to France, with a lot of visits, including to the hometown of President Macron's grandmother in the Pyrenees. So, they have a close relationship to a certain extent. But here again, a balancing act. And we know that comes off the back of a tense visit of von der Leyen as well that came in July to China. In the last trip of Macron to China, von der Leyen was actually traveling with him. It's not the case this time. So, maybe there's playing a game that is slightly different this time around. But certainly Europe worried of being a collateral victim of this tension. And also, they know the dependence, the question of rare earth, for example. So all this will be discussed today, of course, between the presidents. But as you were saying, there's also a wider geopolitical context that President Macron is walking into. On one hand, President Trump's plan for peace in Ukraine has been currently discussed. And here again, we know that, there's been an ambivalent relationship with China on that front. Europeans accusing China of not putting enough pressure on Russia, to a certain extent, kind of fueling Putin's war machine. So, they'll try to get some pressure on that front. And we know that Xi hosted Putin just in September. And in parallel, also interesting to know that President Putin is in India meeting Modi as well. So all these dynamics are going on at the moment. The other tricky element, of course, is Taiwan. We know that when President Macron was in China last time, he made some comments that caused a bit of a stir around Taiwan when he kind of put in that maybe the support for Taiwan in case of any action from China. So we know there are tensions between Japan and China on that subject. And so President Macron will walk this field very carefully because, again, last time he went to the country, there was a bit of a stir around his comments on that region.
So a lot to monitor out of this state visit. So stay with us, Charlotte, because I just want to bring our viewers up to speed with further commentary in relation to this state visit. We've heard, for instance, from China's Foreign Minister Yang Yi has urged France to support China's position on Japan. And this comes after the Japanese Prime Minister said a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a response from Tokyo. Now, Wang also told his French counterpart that China and France should enhance communication and cooperation. Now, elsewhere, the Taiwanese President Xi Jinping told CNBC that the country was working on securing peace.
We believe that peace is priceless and war has no winners. While we aspire to peace, we cannot harbor illusions about it. Peace must be secured through strength. This is why we are increasing our defense budget and strengthening our national defense capabilities, while also cutting back our economic dependence on China. This includes improving our economic resilience. In 2010, 83.8% of Taiwan's outbound investment went to China. Last year, that figure had dropped to around 7%. We are also working side by side with other democracies to reinforce deterrence. Robust preparations are the best way to avoid war and achieve peace.
So let's discuss what's going on here as well with our next guest. She's Daniela Costa, Head of Industrials Research at Goldman Sachs. Daniela, good morning. I'll start by asking you to give us a little bit of color in terms of some of the commentary we heard from President Xi this morning. He said that China will expand market access and opening up. When you hear these kind of remarks, how far do you think China is planning on going?
Good morning, Sylvia. Nice to be here. Yes, this is a big topic at the moment. What's going to happen with China? They have a significant overcapacity in industrial areas, so they are also a very important country for European capital goods and manufacturing companies across our coverage. Roughly 10% of sales come there, but this number has been coming down continuously through the years. It was significantly bigger, the number of exports that Europe did to China. 20 years ago, it was, for our coverage in the S&P, well over 55% of the global exports from Europe that went to China. Now this number is well below 45%. So I think it will be a topic really to watch, but we continue to see the Chinese companies also stepping up on technology.
Daniela, could I ask you something about tech transfers? Because it was interesting to hear from the Elysée before the trip of President Macron to China, talking about how China has benefited from a lot of tech transfers from Europe to China. And that is time to see the other way around, to see, where they talked about sharing the gains of innovation. So now it's Europeans asking for tech transfers from Chinese companies through joint ventures, for example. How likely do you think that is?
This is a super topic with investors at the moment, actually. We just hosted our 17th annual industrial conference here in Goldman Sachs in London. We had about 100 corporates, and the message regarding this point has really shifted. When we started, you wanted to be in China because it was a low-cost country to export. 10 years on, it was because it was a very fast-growing market, and companies had to share technology to participate on that. Nowadays, companies actually want to be in China because some of the forefront investments on things like clean technologies, EVs, AI are happening in China. So European companies actually want to leverage that technology base and R&D base in China to be able to compete internationally. So things have shifted.